I'm not bringing anything new to you. It's more or less probably we're all going to be sharing and talking about things we probably already know, but we're not using, things that we are probably just too busy to use it. So when I do presentation, I like for it to be interactive. So I'm calling on, even if you're behind the screen, your camera is not on, for you to share, because it's all about supervision. The whole purpose of supervision is about that collaborative approach and us coming together. So I would go to the next slide. So the first part we talked about is the role of counseling supervision in practitioners' well-being. In simply, the way I break it down into 4 areas, which is, and I just noticed my counter transference with a small c, that's okay, it just shows how human we are. I did not get to change that. It's the way in over 2 decades, 2.5 decades I've been doing it. The one thing I hear about, burnout don't just happen like that. Burnout would start from somewhere. It starts in the area of self-care, where I think somebody's knocking my door, but I didn't hear the bell, so I'll ignore them. So it starts in the area of self-care, where if we're not paying attention to self-care, I want to put to you guys is, how do you look after your well-being?
Taking exercise.
Okay.
I find
That's fantastic.
I
Yeah.
find when I go to the gym in the morning, and the swimming and then exercise helps me, especially if I do the work in the afternoon, in the evening.
And that's so important, because especially the way we work now, maybe before, or maybe some people still work in an office environment. I work predominantly online. So I don't have that, I don't have the opportunity to be moving around. When you're in the office, you get up to go to the other office, or you get up, go to the kitchen, but here you're working remotely. You might be by yourself in isolation. You sat at your desk, and then you can just keep carrying doing the notes. So we're talking about self-care here. Okay. So what do you have in place in terms of looking after yourself, going to the gym in the morning, or whether it's at lunchtime, taking breaks? So one of the things I say to when I'm working with supervisors, because myself as a supervisor, I'm working with supervisors. One of the things I notice is that self-care is compromised sometimes. And a lot of times there is aspects of counter transfers coming in the room, but we're so focused on helping our clients that we sometimes miss out. So we can go from, oh, I'm great, I've been to the gym, it was fine, but things are happening in the room. And then we end up coming out maybe a few days later, or weeks later, or months later, bearing in mind work is one aspect of our lives. I remember when I was in grad school, one of the research I did was on burnout. And it's amazing how you can be at your desk and get burnt out. Any thoughts on that? Wendy, you're quiet. I'm not going to let you sit there quietly.
Sorry, what was the question again?
I said when I was in grad school, one of the things I wrote a paper, I did some research on burnout, and it's amazing some of the information that came out, how you can be at your desk and end up experiencing burnout. What are your thoughts on that?
For me, burnout is a term that we all know what it is. When you've experienced burnout, it is a a crushing experience. You can lose your self-respect. You can really suffer. People I've known who were well past burnout, they'd alienated themselves from their clients or their patients, and they were really unaware of the impact they were having because they were failing. They were in such a struggling place. So I think this is, very, very, very important. That you kind of talking to us about this today. It can happen to any one of us. When it happens, it's very, very difficult to get support. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And that's so true, because when some people have, in my experience, seen people come to that place of burnout, and it's cost them the career. It's cost them that career in being a helper. One of my mentors have done several training in compassionate focus therapy, Dr. Deborah Lee. And she is so authentic and open talking about it. And she talked about how at PhD level, Dr. Deborah Lee, she's got a private practice, she is lecturing, she wrote a book, and then they were doing this compassionate focus, reprogramming it for veterans when I used to work for veterans. She shared her experience about going through burnout and it didn't get her out of her career, but there were some significant, and she shared this, she talks about it all over the world. And there were some serious consequences. So when you think of the role of supervision is so important in the life of the clinician, being whether you're the supervisor or the supervisee. And I tend to use the triangle model when I work. So I'm always going first into the restorative process. And depending on where the supervisee is, because first thing I always remember is it's a collaborative approach. So when that supervisor is coming to me, I'm seeing another professional coming to me, and we're here to collaborate in the best interest of the client. But I always say, you're not going to be able to help somebody if you can't help yourself. Like they say, when you're flying, even if you have a kid, a baby, you've got to put your oxygen mask first. So how do we begin to notice those signs of lack of self-care? Because we don't just get to burnout. How do you begin to notice the signs that may lead to burnout? Anybody would like to say something?
I've got a feeling it's more about compromising. If you're compromising too much of yourself and your values and what you truly believe in, and if that can lead to burnout because you're giving so much compassion, so much thought to what the other person would be wanting, would be feeling, and you're forgetting that actually whether you follow these things yourself, what you're practicing, what you're providing to other people, you have to show that within yourself first. And it's so true. You have to help yourself before you can help others. It's so true.
Some of the things that could lead to burnout is lack of boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah. So how are you? I normally ask my supervisee, and I ask myself the same question. I'll talk about this a bit more when I'm having to access my internal supervisor. So the question is, so let me give a practical example here. I have that client, and I know from the better health perspective, we've talked about that in peer supervision, right? we're getting those late messages that's coming in, because the BetterHelp platform is sort of different. You know, you go to work, you have your working hours, you're away from work, you're away from your work emails. Hopefully, you're not going back to that. But with BetterHelp, everything is there. So what discipline do you have in place? What are your emotional boundaries? What are your physical boundaries? How do you take a step back when you're the helper and we're helping people who wants to help? You know, if I'm not helping, what am I doing to my clients, right? How do you take that step back so that when you compromise, you don't end up feeling guilty?
Mm.
And if you do feel guilty, is it a healthy guilt or unhealthy? Because it's okay to feel guilty. So let's take a moment and pause there and just see. Yeah.
Rosa,
Maybe.
I was also thinking, is it also, you know, valid to sort of schedule and sort of at time, you need space to be reflective
Absolutely.
of what's taking place for you, because otherwise it's go, go, go. It's the next appointment, it's the next this, it's I have to do that. And then it's even going to individual supervision, right? That's like just like another appointment that I have to go to. To actually schedule time for pause. To go, what is going on for me? How am I feeling in this process? And that could give you
slowing
some
down.
signs.
Yeah. Another aspect is when you're in the room in session with clients, because countertransference is a really big part that impacts on burnout. Because we are helpers, right? We're therapists. And if I remember 20 plus years back, somebody is. Corinne, if you're able to read some of those things on the chat, that would be great at some point. I remember my training then, the expectation, the way you would sit, the way you pause, if you do that, why are you doing all that? So it's almost like we have been trained or structured, create a certain way that we have to look. For me now, certain of my clients, I would actually, if I'm seeing them virtually, sometimes I will come in this session looking so casual because I'm trying to do what I call mirroring effect with a client. And I've actually been able to shift clients. But what's going on in the room that could be impacting you? Countertransference is a big thing. How do you attend to that in that moment in the room? You talk about reflective practice, which is outside of the session, versus reflecting in the session. How do I maintain my boundaries and hold my boundaries and attend to myself? What toolbox do you have with you? Because that would then come to the restorative process. So when I'm sitting with a client, and that client really is the kind of client when it's 5 minutes to the end of the session, it's about to drop something new and big. Do I go with it, or do I remind the client we have 5 minutes to the end? Because I have another client and I need space, as Corinne was saying. So do I have my boundary in place? Do I remember my boundary? Remember, other people are not responsible for implementing your boundaries. We implement our boundaries. How do you say to that client, I notice you have just dropped something new. It might take some time to get into this topic. So my suggestion is we put it at the top of the agenda for the next session. Or do we kind of just maybe just go with the client, and by the time we look at it, because we're human. I've done that. I put my hand up. I've done that sometimes. Anyone else in the room that may have done that sometimes?
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. And sometimes you're on the phone going, I'll be 5 minutes late. But these are just a little thing. You know, they said little drops of water builds a mighty ocean. So for me, when I talk about the well-being of the practitioner, it's about, what about those minutes? I learned the term minute mindfulness. I think it's from Shauna Shapiro. She talks about mindful minutes, I think, or Chris Gamma. So sometimes I'm not able to wait till the end of the day. Sometimes something could have happened, technology is playing up, and that's creating awareness, not avoiding. That's why. And sometimes real life happens, like Janina Fisher says, don't allow your nervous system to be hijacked by the system. So what could you be doing? So let's go now to restorative process. How can we be restoring in the moment? So talking about awareness, somebody just put something about awareness. What's your posture? Notice I'm moving and I'm sitting back. As we're leaning forward, we're in a stress, we're activating the stress system, okay? As we're concentrating, we're talking, we're all using our stress hormone, we're falling in. So in that moment, if I'm having a difficult client, if my awareness is not there, I'm likely mirroring the client and going in with the client. How do I pull myself back into a restorative posture? So that then the client, hopefully, if it's a virtual, will begin to mirror me. I got a client earlier today that mirrored me when we were on the telephone. Because whatever we're talking about, I said, I'm standing now as I'm speaking with you, taking just small steps. And what that client needed was something like that. I said, well, how am I going to do that? I'll have to do this. What if it's raining? I could just feel what we're talking about. And I just stood up and I was on the phone. I've got this long cord in my headset. And she said, oh, you're standing? I said, oh, yeah, I'm standing. And I'm even rolling my shoulders. What I was doing there, I was attending. So what could we be doing moment by moment when we're in session to really pay attention to those minutes or 30 seconds? Because we know clients can drop things, or maybe we've been sat down for some time and we can't wait till lunchtime. How are we structuring our lunch period? Are we taking 5 minutes or 10 minutes to go out? Or are we catching up on notes or something else? So that's just one. So the next topic is, this is not a long time, so this is just touching on things. This is something I could do like a whole 2 or 3 days workshop on. Yeah. So the supervisor-supervisor relationship. This is so important. I wrote something down as I was preparing. Let me go to my notes. This is key. Trust is the currency of therapy, and it is important to get that going from the onset of therapy. And it is a huge part of the success of treatment. This is the same when it comes to the supervisor-supervisee relationship. If there is no trust in that relationship, ask yourself the question, are you getting yourself what you need from that relationship? My question is to you guys, what's your relationship like with your supervisors? Anyone want to go first?
I have a good relationship with my supervisor.
Okay. And what does good means?
It means that he's not judgmental. It means that I understand that personal issues I have to take to my personal therapy, but he doesn't respond in that way. Oh, I'm sorry, we cannot talk about that because this is down to your personal therapy.
Yeah.
And I value that.
Yeah.
The other things that I find that make a good relationship with my supervisor, that he doesn't come across as he knows all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's competent. He shows that he's competent, but he doesn't show that, oh, I know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And from my previous experience, other supervisors, that was something that was kind of put me off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the other thing that also I consider it's a good relationship with him, because it's kind of transparent, real. Yes, that's the 3 points that I find that to me means a good relationship.
Aluna?
Sorry. I was going to say something, but I just went on to the wrong, trying to unmute myself, so I went on to chat instead. Okay. Sorry about that. Yes, yeah, my experience of supervision is very good. We have a lot to talk about. Can I tell you who my supervisor is? I'm not sure. No. Okay. It's an honest conversation. I find that it's a very relaxed, and I can express my thoughts of what my client brings to the subject, and I get a good validation, also experience of my supervisor's experience too, of having experience of her knowledge, long-term knowledge of helping others, and she can bring that to my own reflections as well, which is really helpful. I find that the time goes very fast, in supervision, because I suppose because I have to give the background detail as well of my client. That can take a little bit of. I'm coming in with a bit more of a story to tell as well. Yeah, because I have to give some context to what my client, how they're presenting, and then asking from my supervisor's viewpoint, trying to get that expertise, trying to get the experience and knowledge. Yeah.
I guess one of the things that I normally ask supervisors, what are your expectations of supervision? What are your expectations of your supervisor? And how well do you know the supervisor?
I like to think of it as well in terms of you were saying sort of a trust relationship, in that it's also kind of, you have that. I have like a feeling like my supervisor is someone that I can rely on, who's part of like my toolbox that helps me to function as in my sort of day-to-day workspace. So it's almost a sort of an invisible sort of like other person, that you are thinking of or remembering, what has come up in sessions in supervision, and what am I remembering that I need to hold here, while I'm working with the clients as well. And so it's
that
part
parallel
of your
process.
toolbox. Yeah,
Yeah,
I feel that.
yeah. And I think what's important is sometimes, and I know it's happening a lot now because a lot of the researches I'm looking at in some recent training again, is sometimes there's this misunderstanding where sometimes people come to supervision. It's almost like it's a counseling relationship. And I remember when I was doing my advanced training, I remember I got pulled up by some other people who were in the training just as me. But they were new to supervision. I was coming in doing a further CPD, and they thought, oh, I was tough. I wasn't tough. I was just asking questions. It's not a counseling relationship. It's supervision. The supervisor has a bird's eye view. It's a collaborative approach. It's parallel processing going, kind of what's going on between the supervisor and supervisee relationship. The client is the third person on the wall. Likewise, what's going on between the supervisor and the client in their room, the supervisor is on the wall. Sometimes I'll be thinking, I wonder what my supervisor would be telling me to say to this client or to do about this client, you know. Or sometimes I have to tap in on my own internal supervisor in terms of what I do. But I challenge, and I'm saying that emphatically because I had a wonderful supervisor. He's no longer here. But because of his approach, very knowledgeable, but he would ask me, why? Why that intervention? What's the rationale behind it? So I respect you, I respect everything you do, but he would say, why? Help me understand. And then I remember what he said. I went, what do you mean why? Because he was like, but you know, that was some of the best supervision sessions because he really would challenge me. But then what he did was for me to either reflect in that moment with him or to go out and then reflect on the approach. And then the next time I saw him, I would come back to say, I reflected on this. And here is, I tried what we talked about. This didn't work, or that worked, or I got something else. But if your supervisor is not challenging you, I invite you to go back and ask yourself, are you really getting what you need from your supervisor? Challenging you does not mean telling you what to do. No. They can only offer. Yeah. But your supervisor has the bird's eye view. They're there to see things that you may not see. They're the gatekeeper. Sometimes, well, you're not in jail in what you do, but sometimes I might just want to just do something and my supervisor will say, what's the rationale behind that? Well, they just, like you want to extend a session and this client is not doing any work. You're doing all the work. Go back to the first slide, burnout. We are not responsible to make changes. We're alongside them. Only them can bring about the change they need. So if your supervisor is not challenging you, you're likely not going to be able to challenge your client. But what I say challenge in a compassionate, empathetic way, you're holding them, like Janina Fisher says, we need to be their cheerleaders, but it's not cheerleading them just sitting there. It's cheerleading them along. So I always say to supervisees, if you don't feel challenged, if you're getting all the nice things, the work we do is challenging work. But it's the how. I always learn from supervisors. I never come out of a session that I don't learn from the supervisee. And I always hope that they get something from the session as well. It's that two-way approach. I wrote something down. The parallel process. How does the relationship between the supervisor and the supervisee overlay the supervisor and the client relationship? So I look at how the supervisor is presenting in the session, how they're interacting with me, or how I'm interacting with them. Sometimes I go, oh, Rose, are you being too much on this supervisor? You know? And then I would say to the supervisor, did you feel challenged? I said, I feel like you were doing too much. So I was almost kind of, no, don't do that. You know, I'm very interactive in my approach. So again, it's not wrong. It's not about right or wrong. It's the how. The how is the compassion, is the genuineness, is the unconditional positive regard. Because I said to them, if it's somebody who has kids or loved one, if your loved one says they're going to jump on the street in front of a car, are you just going to leave them to do that? Or they're going to put their hand on the burner? No. You know, so again, the relationship is one that would look at the experience that's going on, the dynamics that's going on there. You know, the supervisor should be the observation about the here and now. They should be bringing things that's going up in the room for you that you may not have seen, that bad side view. Likewise, when you're in the room with your client, they're not able to see certain things that you might see. And you bringing that in the room, I notice, I observe, I notice, I may be wrong. So it's the how we communicate it. Yeah. And then changes in the supervisor-supervisory interaction. This is really key. It goes back to the thing I read out in the start. We need to pay attention to the relationship, because if I'm with a supervisor where I don't feel like, or I notice there's a change in our interaction, am I questioning my supervisor? Do I feel comfortable? Because remember, you're the supervisor, you choose who you want as a supervisor. It's a two-way relationship. I have had to let somebody go recently because I said to the person what they were asking for, I couldn't provide one. And also my responsibility as a supervisor, I had to take some tough steps with compassion. And every time I would bring the word ethics, this person said, every time you say use the word ethics, you make me feel like, I went, okay. I'm only asking questions. What's the ethical rationale around this? There's an ethical dilemma. Ethics is at the center of supervision. Yeah. And if that word is not coming up, I have worked with supervisee. I go on their website, I see different, especially when you're taking them through the accreditation process. The BACP is relying on supervisors to do all the checks and balances for them. Yeah, but it is the counselor's responsibility. We can only make recommendations and suggestions. You are just as empowered and in control, not your supervisor. It's a collaborative relationship. So if you notice changes are happening in the interaction, feel free to ask. If you don't feel comfortable to ask, I would question that relationship. And that could lead to burnout. Are you getting what you are paying for? So a lot of people who go in and they go out, they don't really think. On the restorative self-care side, sometimes people come in, we don't even touch clients. We spend the entire time on the self-care because they needed to be there. Not looking after yourself is an ethical issue. We need to look after ourselves. It presents an ethical dilemma. The supervisor you go to, how well do they understand your theoretical approach? Do you interview them about that? or you may be working with a different approach. Do they ask you the questions? How? Because a lot of times, what I've come across is people would go to a workshop here, a workshop there. Okay, especially working with trauma clients, it can be so complicated. And in as much as we want to help, like I'm working with a trainee supervisor. So only just started first year working with trauma clients. I had to send them lots of videos because they're not even aware of the ethical dilemma they're facing with. And they were feeling tired, exhausted because they're in school, they're working, they're young parents. As a supervisor, I had to intervene between that supervisor and the organization. I didn't have to do it directly, but if it means that I have to do that, I would step up for her. So your supervisor is there to also advocate on your behalf, because this person is just taking. And the way they are presenting in this session, we didn't even get to case presentation. We needed to pay attention to her self-care and well-being, especially for a trainee counselor. That's a perfect recipe for burnout and to discourage someone out of the profession. Yeah. Any thoughts so far? How are we doing with time?
I think you've given some really good points for us so far on, because I think that is important. Like I said, we all have to receive supervision, but what should we be looking for? It's not just about finding a supervisor that has availability and based on the fee that they're charging. It needs to be, the fact that you are empowered in the relationship too, that you feel that there is trust with this person, that they are advocating for your best interests, that there is just the right amount of gentle challenging in your in your work that you are bringing, and of course making sure that self-care and ethics are at the center of that relationship, being sensitive to the changes in that too, because of course circumstances do change, and being able to learn from your supervisor, that's the other one too.
Your supervisor needs to be at a level with more experience than you, because the whole idea is supervision space is also educational. When you don't know, you're not sure, you want to be able to go to your supervisor. So if they don't know enough, I would question that. I always say when I meet with new supervisors the first time, I tell them about myself, I tell them about my background, what I've done. I also ask about their orientation. I have had people, I'm trained in EMDR, but I'm not accredited. Okay, and all my EMDR training, most of them is with a US clinical psychologist. I just love their approach and everything. But because of that, I will not supervise somebody using EMDR. And that was the ethical dilemma I had with somebody. This supervisor wanted me to supervise their work. There was EMDR. They had just done it briefly. They're not even finished training yet. So I said I couldn't do that. They need to have an EMDR trained qualified supervisor. They were also doing couples therapy. I am trained and qualified in that. But I needed to see their qualification that they can do couples work. Not just because what's happening now is because we have this online platform, people are taking people from everywhere. Because the money can be attractive. I just turned somebody down a few months back who wanted supervision, but the reason I turned them down, they were asking if the money is lucrative. Is this going to be a lucrative business for me to go into? And I asked certain other questions, and there were other things that came up because I had already kind of agreed, but then the person came up with some stuff, and when I sort of like went back to take my time and, just do some checks and bounds. And it's safe to share that here. This person did not disclose, and this is what could happen. They did not disclose that they had worked with a client, because the way they found me was through a client I was working with. But they disclosed the client. It was also their client. They said, oh, it's just a friend. They did not disclose that the recommendation came from a client, because I would have taken a different approach. That was a serious ethical issue that I took to supervision. I have 2 supervisors, and I have a third, which is like a consultant. I consult with her, not on a monthly basis, maybe on a bi-monthly basis. And they agreed with me that that was a serious ethical issue. If this person could not be honest at the onset. So somebody like that, you may feel bad, oh, well, we're here to help, work with them. But the relationship was already ruptured before the start. So that takes me to when your relationship, the interaction is different and the relationship might be ruptured. Are you confident enough to work towards repairing? Go in the helping business. A good supervisor is one that would want to repair a ruptured relationship. This other person I talked about, we hadn't started yet. So that was a different ballgame. So it was easy for me to just say no. As human beings, first, before clinicians or supervisor, we are going to make mistakes. We will make mistakes. The important thing is when you recognize it, are you able to have that conversation to repair a ruptured relationship? Or if the relationship has come to a place where you're not growing in the supervision anymore, or the supervisor may not be as effective for various reasons, not because they're bad or not good, but for any other reason. It could be health, it could be, I had to end a 7-year relationship with a supervisor for health reasons. It wasn't easy, but what he did, he helped me find my next supervisor. He said, I know you well. He said, I know you so well. I'll make some recommendation. I was saying, where am I going to go now? And the recommendation he made, it's worked beautifully. So again, you can see there's a lot in terms of clinical supervision, what it can offer to us. But clinical supervision is not counseling. And sometimes we may just miss it, going to supervision, wanting to feel all good and fun. No, you should come out feeling empowered, but at the same time, if you're not feeling challenged, I would ask the question, how effective is the supervision space working for me? Or is it a feel-good space? So, see next. So we kind of talked about the benefits there as we go. So again, peer supervision, as Corinne said, most of it at the beginning, we learn from each other. It's an extra resource. It helps us to reflect on our practices, on our self-care habits. And we have this wonderful platform on WhatsApp that we use. People are quick to respond, so it's a really, really useful space, and we're able to go back and reflect. It helps us to develop our internal supervisor. I've used that word a few times, but that might be a whole other session. What the supervisor expects from his supervising? This is a question I ask when I meet with a supervisor. Every one of us is unique in our ways, And the question is, keep an eye on the time, The question is, so that we can have questions. The question is, I can say to Wendy and to, Aruno, am I saying it correctly? Your name? Or did I just
Aruna. Oh,
Aruna.
sorry.
I thought
Aruna,
that
yes.
Aruna, yeah, Aruna.
That's okay.
So I cannot expect Aruna and Wendy to have the same requirement, but there is a framework that we work with, and the framework helps us. So things like attendance, sometimes people would cancel at the last minute. Now, if there's an emergency or something important, so there's that parallel process as well. When you're with clients, we expect our clients to follow the attendance policy, like Alex was talking about earlier, sending those cancellation letters or reminder notes and things like that. So we expect clients to notify us within that policy. So likewise in supervision, I would have somebody that would have had a supervisor that, oh, sorry, I'm sitting on the sunbed, wherever. I went, okay. Now, my compassionate self said, don't charge. Oh, no, I'm charging because it's work. Yeah. So again, we're looking at, for me as a supervisor, what I expect is all of this, and what I try to give to my supervisor is to respect their time so that I attend. If I'm running late for any reason, I'll let them know. I come to supervision prepared so that even though all my supervisors are so wonderful, I get challenged. I have one particular one now. She said, why would you do that, Rose? I went, okay, let's talk about that. And I appreciate that. And this supervisor said to me the other day, I noticed a difference in you. Remember what we were saying, supervisor's observation? She says, I noticed a difference in you. There's a shift in you. And I went, yeah, you're right. And it was a good shift. That's the kind of supervisor that I want. When I was struggling, she noticed that she wasn't herself. When I made the shift, she said, oh, you're glowing. I went, yeah, thank you. And some of the things I was struggling with, we were able to talk about it. And she challenged me about some of them, some around the self-care. There are times in our lives we would have just too much on our plates to eat. But a supervisor, a good supervisor, would assist you around that. And she noticed the difference. That's the kind of supervisor I want. And I go prepared and ready. I also want my supervisor to not tell me about the difficult cases. I want them to talk about their successes as well. Tell me about what's going well, because you're doing a great job, not just what's not going well. Yeah. And I engage, I collaborate, and openness and trust. So if I feel peed off, therapy language, about a client, supervision is a safe place. I said, that client was so hard. Oh my gosh, my head was spinning. Can I continue with them? What suggestion do you have? What do I do? It doesn't make me less of a clinician. It makes me authentic and open. It's a safe space. And we can talk, we can explore, well, what are you doing that's not working? Okay. So I think we're going to go on to question because I'm mindful of time. Yeah. Are you getting, we talked about this already, knowledge. So we've touched on these. Yeah. So let's go to the Q&A. It's blank. It's left for you guys. Any questions? I could just go on, but I have to be mindful.
I think, Rose, a question that has been on my mind more recently is who should consider becoming a supervisor? When in your career should you consider, doing a course and offering that service?
That's a very good question. The question I ask people is, how comfortable are you in yourself and in your accessing your internal supervisor? Anybody can become a supervisor after you've been in the profession at a certain time, But the question is, how comfortable are you? How equipped are you in yourself? Because God bless my late supervisor. When I was thinking, I was already trained as a supervisor in my master's program, and I was kind of tapping into the role here and there, but not formally, not outside of within an organization. I was already doing that. But to step out, he said to me, and this is what he said to me, and I've experienced it. I have experienced it big time. And exactly what he said, and it was around accreditation as well. He said to me, when you step up to be a supervisor, you are taking the responsibility not only of the supervisee, but you hold that gateway. You know, they say the gatekeeper. You are the gatekeeper of the client as well. Because if that supervisor is practicing in a way that presents ethical dilemma, it is your responsibility. Because this is why it's not counseling. It's not being, no. There are times when you have to be direct. The most challenging people I've worked with in supervision are the person-centered. But after about few sessions, about 4, 5, 6 sessions, they say, oh, thank you. I see where you're coming from. Because when you're dealing with somebody who is presenting with hyperarousal, and you're telling me, but I'm asking them, so what is good? No. They are triggered. It's a different kind of presentation. A person-centered approach is not going to work. We're talking about stabilizing that client. Because every time you're asking them and you're wanting them to think, you're asking them to tap their sympathetic system, which is more adrenaline, more cortisol. They're getting more hyper-aroused. They need to reduce their anxiety level. So I remember working with a particular supervisor. Oh boy, it was so hard. I was going into that supervision session. It was within an organization, and I was like, okay, all right. But I had my rationale, and I had to bring out the BACP ethical values, the duty of care and beneficence to the client. And I brought that out. I said, based on the ethical values here, how are you meeting the client's need? I said, you can be very person-centered in your approach, and that's your way of being. But your way of intervening can be stabilization. And if you're working with a client with trauma symptoms, we're not saying work with the trauma, it's with the event, the symptom. It's about stabilizing that client here and now. And all that means is it could be validating them. It's okay. Are you okay? I noticed this. It's okay. You know, kind of in a person-centered way, you know, kind of being that empathic, compassionate, but asking the why, what, so what are you doing? And they're not doing this and they're not doing that. And I said to the supervisor, it looks like you're trying to move the client, but the client is not ready to move yet. That sort of person, I wouldn't recommend becoming a supervisor. Because as a supervisor, you don't have to be expert in all of the theoretical approach, but you have to have knowledge of them. You have to have an understanding of them. You know, I have worked, I was trained at Johns Hopkins Community Psychiatric Program in the US. I saw all sorts. I worked in a dual diagnosis. I worked in the prison system. I worked in a juvenile detention center. I worked with adolescents. I've worked with veterans. And there are times when we can be person-centered. We're always person-centered. I don't think we can do this work without being person-centered. But that's your way of being. It is different from your ways of intervening. Your ways of understanding and your ways of being. So your way of being can be person-centered. Your way of understanding can be person-centered. But your way of intervening has to meet what's happening in the room in that moment. And what I find as I round up is I come across a lot of people who take the job because it's a job and they want to fit their theoretical approach to the client's presentation. And that presents an ethical dilemma rather than say, I don't think, I always say to potential clients, I don't think this is my area of expertise. And for that reason, I think it will be best for you. And then I would send them to the BACP, the BPS, counseling directory. So this is a huge topic.
Knowing your limits. Knowing your limits. Yeah.
Duty of care beneficence.
Yeah. Okay.
It's so easy for us to step out of our boundaries, competencies. So I'm very quick to go back to the BACP. Or if you say you're the BPS, I'll go to the BPS. If you're national counsellors, I'll go there. I've got them all. It's not me. It's what our ethical bodies are asking us to do. It's what the profession, you have the professional, the PSA Standard Association. All clinical bodies sit under this association. So as clinicians, we can always go back to them and look at what does it say. And we agree, we profess to abide by the code of ethics to our work. One of them is working within your competencies. But the temptation is there to have this platter and you want to eat it all. All right?
Thank you, Rose. Yes.
Yeah.
Always insightful and so full of experience. Thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us today.